Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the trustees and staff of the museum and the Museum Society of Mumbai, I extend a warm welcome and greetings to everyone. We thank Dr. Annapurna Garimella, speaker this evening, for accepting our invitation. Thank you so much. The KARL KHANDALAVALA Memorial Lecture was instituted immediately after his demise by the Museum Society of Mumbai in collaboration with the museum in the year 1998. And since then, it has been one of the prestigious memorial lectures at the museum. The first KJK Memorial Lecture was delivered by Sri Jagdish Mittal, a noted private collector and also a close associate of KARL KHANDALAVALA, on the subject, the unknown style of painting of Tirupati 1600 to 1900 CE. Thereafter, many scholars, distinguished scholars, delivered this prestigious memorial lecture every year in different aspects of Indian art, culture, and architecture. The last lecture was delivered by Professor Naman Ahuja, distinguished scholar and art historian, on the study of Asmolean archaeological collection. And today we have Dr. Annapurna Garimella, a noted designer and an art historian, to deliver the 23rd KARL KHANDALAVALA Memorial Lecture on her latest research. Dr. Garimella is one of the few talented scholars in the country focused on various aspects of Indian design, art, and architecture. And she believes in accepting challenges. KARL KHANDALAVALA was born on 16 March 1904 in Bombay in an aristocratic Parsi family of lawyers. His father was the Chief Justice of the former Baroda state, and several members of his family were also lawyers. On his mother's side, very interesting, his grand uncle was the famous lawyer, politician, and freedom fighter, Sir Firoz Shah Mehta. KARL was educated in mission schools in Panchagani, Pune, and graduated from the Elphinstone College of Bombay in history. He then took his law degree and was later called to the bar from Middle Temple, London. Though he joined the Royal Volunteer Air Force during the Second World War and served with Indian Air Force as a navigator for a brief period, he was brought up and trained as a lawyer and grew to become a distinguished bar at law. The city will remember him for the Nanavati versus State of Maharashtra case, in which Nanavati, a naval officer, was put up on trial for the alleged murder of his wife's paramour. This was amongst the last cases to be heard as a jury trial in India. The rest is history. KHANDALAVALA's interest in Indian art is rooted in his love for history. He was a frequent visitor to the house of a relative, late B.N. Trezariwala, a well-known collector of Indian art. Trezariwala was not only a collector of paintings, but also eclectic in his taste. It is recorded that his enormous number of paintings, if I am not mistaken, about 200, provided for the foundation of the National Museum's holdings of paintings. Trezariwala prevailed on KHANDALAVALA to study his collection, and thus it all began. Those were the days when he had opportunity of listening to such stalwarts as Anand Kumar Sahni, O.C. Ganguly, Ajit Ghosh, Father Heras, Mati Chandra, and others at the tea party hosted by Trezariwala every Sunday. But within the heart and soul, he was an art critic and art historian. His first book, Indian Sculpture and Painting, was published as early as in 1938, when he was 34 years old. His second major publication on Amrita Sergil, the famous young Indian artist who set a trend of modern art in India, was published in 1944. His Pahari miniature painting is a classic, which even today serves as the guideline for scholars. He authored several monumental works with Eric Dickinson, Moti Chandra, and others. The development of style in Indian painting was his other important work. He has also revised and edited two great works of Indian art history, one by V.S. Smith and the other by A. Kumar Shahji. KARL was closely associated with the National Museum, New Delhi from its inception and was a member of its purchase committee. He was also a trustee and chairman of the formerly Prince of Wales Museum, now the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya. KHANDALAVALA helped the museum build its Indian collection into a strong one and also one of the best in the country. The museum is also a beneficiary of his personal collection of about 700 works of art. KHANDALAVALA's collection is diverse, but miniature paintings predominate. Some of the best Pahari paintings are those of the Basholi, Guler, and Kangra. His fascination for the legendary Pahari master Nayan Shuk is evident from the fact that 9 of the master's works are included in his collection. The paintings of Raja Balwant Singh by the Pahari master Nayan Shuk are among our greatest treasures and the envy of many museums. Masterpieces from his collection in the museum were published in the form of a catalogue in 2004 by the trustees of the museum and was authored by Dr. Protapaditya Pal and Dr. Kalpana Desai. Art historian, author, distinguished barrister, and legal luminary, KARL KHANDALAVALA had held a unique position in the country by virtue of his profound knowledge of the manifold arts of India. No other museum in the country had the privilege of having as its chairman for so many years a person of the eminence of KHANDALAVALA, who had generously donated to the museum his magnificent personal collection of Indian arts. It is always a pleasure to read him and more to hear him. It's my pleasure to introduce speaker of this evening, Dr. Annapurna Garimella. Is a designer and an art historian. Her research focus on late medieval Indic architecture and the history and practices of vernacular visual and built cultures in India after independence. Dr. Garimella also heads Jackfruit Research and Design, an organization with a specialized portfolio of design, research, and curation. Jackfruit's recent curatorial projects include Vernacular in the Contemporary 2010-11 and Mutable Ceramic and Clay Art in India since 1947 and Barefoot School of Craft in Goa 2017-18, noteworthy. Her latest book is a co-edited Mark volume titled The Contemporary Hindu Temple, Fragments for a History, 2019, and her upcoming edited volume is titled The Long Arc of South Asian Art, a reader in honor of Dr. Vidya Deja. And another book, I think under preparation, Digesting the Past, the Discourse of Sacralized Architectural Renovation in Southern India, 14th to 17th century. We all look forward to receiving the new copy of your publication. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation. I think everyone is looking forward to your presentation. Over to Dr. Annapurna Garimella. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Dr. Mukherjee, and to Jyoti Roy and Samiksha Puri and all the staff at the CSMVS who are making this event possible. I feel extremely grateful to be associated with KARL KHANDALAVALA in another Bombay institution. I was a research editor at MARG, and he had a very close relationship with MARG for many, many years. So it sometimes you get those moments where you feel like you've come full circle. So let me just begin by sharing my screen and then put myself on, just one second. Now, I wonder why my image is not showing. No, this is not showing. Yes, there we go. Okay. Okay. So my talk is titled Kinship and the Temple in the Pre-Modern Deccan. So this work is coming out of a long engagement I've had with not only the design of the temple, but also with larger social structures. Because I would like to argue that social structures are also designed. And design is a kind of, temple design is a kind of poetics. And I hope that the presentation today, the lecture today, will communicate this to all the participants who have come to listen. And I thank all of you taking your time out on Monday evening to come and watch and listen to this lecture. So I begin by first a long passage from my teacher, Natalie Campen's remarkable book, Family Fictions in Roman Art. She was my dissertation supervisor, the late Natalie Campen, a remarkable feminist art historian and an unbelievable mentor to all her students. And I think she made it possible for me to think about things along with Vidya Deheja, my other teacher, of things in a different way, in a way that was happening as I was doing research in the field. So this is an occasion to honor not only KARL KANDALAVALA, but also Vidya Deheja and Natalie Campen. This passage it'll be clear that I have some, this is from her book, Family Fictions in Roman Art. It will be clear that I have some theoretical assumptions that emerge along the way. One is that the family is a social construction, rather than the sort of natural phenomenon that in its universality and biological stability can be taken for granted. That's assumption one. The second assumption is that social constructions are always historically contingent and profoundly related to ranking systems and the modes of production that support these systems. Social status, gender, geographic location, age, all of them matter. Third, visual representation is a form of discourse that not only brings social constructions into material form, it is itself socially constructed and therefore shapes those constructions as it renders them visible. So this is the basis of my talk today. This is linked to the ideas in my dissertation and the work that I've done afterwards. Some of this fieldwork is brand new. So I'm going to present for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. And I welcome all sorts of questions. And if I say I don't know, it's because I really don't know, because some of this work is brand new. And the way of conceiving this work is brand new. So I feel like I wanted to present in honor of KARL KANDALAVALA, a lecture in which I'm approaching things newly because he was quite brave, and he was at the beginning of making an art history that I have inherited, as have many people, the field of art history. So I hope that whatever I present today is also maybe it's also a throwing down the gauntlet to the field of art history itself to rethink some of its stable foundations and remake itself, reconstruct itself. And we can talk about that too in the question and answer session. So the lecture is organized, it's a complicated lecture, so that's why I've colored these passages. So the first section is the family is a social construction. The second section is social constructions are always historically contingent and profoundly related to ranking systems and the modes of production that support these systems. And the third section is broken down into two sections so that there's a third and a fourth, the third green line. So section number 3 is visual representation as a form of discourse that not only brings social constructions into material form, and the last section is that the temple itself is socially constructed and therefore shapes those constructions as it renders them visible. So kinship is a social construction. I'd like to begin there. So I've expanded the term family to include kinship for my purposes, and you will understand why as I proceed. So how are kinship systems made among the ruling elite classes? King, and here I mean when I say ruling elite classes, kings, queens, merchants, ascetics, and gods. You might find it odd to put the gods in the category of ruling an elite class, but gods were often considered rulers. We know this. And heavenly rulers on earth, and they had a certain role to play in a king's domain. They often validated the king's rule. It was deeply related to their ability to rule the territories that they made into a kingdom. So I've given some ways in which kinship systems are made through marriage. And I'm going to read these out because it's important for you to, I'll talk them through as I read them out. Between two people who are related to each other, those are cross cousins. And I put down names here. I think it's important for me to acknowledge 4 people, including myself, along with Natalie Campen and Vidya, 4 people whose work I'm building on my dissertation work, but also the work of historian Cynthia Talbot, the work of the art historians Jean and Basundara Filioza, and the work of Samna Gururaja, who's just completed a wonderful dissertation on family in Karnataka, in inscriptions. She's a historian, so she's working primarily with inscriptions and how family structures are part of making kingships. And how does kinship actually get configured into constructing patriarchal power? Through marriage, between two people who are related to each other, cross cousins. This is something unusual for people in other parts of India, perhaps, but quite common in southern India, through their opposite sex relatives. So a mother's brother and a father's sister's children can marry the opposite cousin, gendered cousin, opposite sex cousin. And in some cases, direct marriage between a niece and an uncle. I have not yet heard of an occasion where an aunt and a nephew marry, but theoretically, maybe it's possible. I've never heard it, heard of it. But in this case, this can also happen. Between families seeking to build on each other's ranks and each other's ranks. So that would be people who are bride givers and bride takers. So one would be in a higher position. Generally, it's the bride taker would be in a higher position, but that's always not the case, as Samna Gururaja has pointed out, that bride givers can also be in a higher position. Between families who belong to the same sect and perhaps even follow the same guru. So that's one potential. Another way to make a kinship is through birth. So you say fathers and sons acknowledge that they're part of a kinship network, and that doesn't preclude parasite and all those kinds of things. Mothers and son inscriptions see sons sometimes really extolling their mothers for their noble wifehood, for being very very noble women and birthing them. Fathers and daughters, and mothers and daughters. Through adoption, I've only heard in inscriptions, I have not read every single inscription of this period, but in general, I've only seen examples of male child from a relative's family, or perhaps some kind of affection. There's also lots of ambiguous situations. There's one situation in which a dai, a breast mother, somebody who breastfeeds a child, is also acknowledged in some way as a part of a kinship network, and a temple is constructed in her honor. Through service in court and battle, and here its kings and junior kings and officers, through service to the same God and the aspect of that, or the same avatar of that God. So it could be, so for example, Shiva, but everybody could say we're all not only worshippers of Shiva, but we're worshippers of Kaleshwara, through service to a guru and his lineage. So we're all Kalamukhas, and we are all not just Kalamukhas, but a particular section of the Kalamukhas. From entering into an ascetic lineage, so you then claim a kind of kinship within the ascetic community you've joined as a brahmachari. Through membership in a professional organization. So, for example, when you are members of a mercantile group, you can use kinship as a metaphor to make cohesiveness between various merchants who might actually be related to each other because they would probably marry into each other's family, and we've no occasions of that. Through practicing similar customs. For example, if you are a Kalamukha worshipper, practicing the way that they ask you to worship Shiva, the way that you are supposed to behave in socially, and the people that you're supposed to shun. So for example, some texts tell us that you're supposed to shun a Shudra. So this is not all, I want to make that very clear, that this is not a society that did not have discriminations. In fact, it was conflicted because some inscriptions say that you should be good to everybody, but then the same inscription will also say to shun Shudras. And some texts of that community will also say that. The inscriptions won't say, but the texts of associated with that community or that temple or that particular sect will say such things. So these are things we can talk about more deeply when in our conversation, through encompassing all gods in one supreme God. So there can be a kinship among gods. And I'll show you examples of many of these situations to elucidate and to show how this is done. So this, I've shown you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ways. These are not the only ways, I think, but these are 10 ways that I can speak about with some confidence. These 10 are not mutually exclusive, as you might understand from what I've just said. In fact, they're often deeply overlapping, and because they overlap, they construct stable systems of power for the ruling elite classes. And I'm going to argue, and not argue is too strong a word. The thesis I want to put forward is that this stable structure is one of the things that pins it down is the temple. So the temple isn't the only thing, but it's one of the major things. So let me just step back from the temple and begin by having us look at a very familiar to some people object, which is the marriage necklace that women in South India wear. And I just want us to pay close attention to the diversity of marriage necklaces that women in South India wear. So it can be as simple as a turmeric root, dried turmeric root, tied with string and then tied by the groom around the neck of the bride. So this is the most basic way of wearing it. And if you have, and all the texts, whether they're temple building texts or worship texts, always give about 70 options. I'm exaggerating the word 70, but many options. Immediately, it tells that this is a society that says this is the best way, but if you can't do the best way because you're not rich, then here's 15 other ways to do the same thing. So that creates a lot of flexibility in thinking about how to live life in a particular system, and to function ritually, to function politically, to function familially, to function as a knowledge maker. So that's one kind. And then there are other kinds. So for example, from Kerala, we have the Ella leaf thali. And then from the Christian community, you have the cross thali. The gold one with the granulated beads is a Syrian Christian thali. Down below, you see two thalis. Both are from Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. models. This is a breast where the nipple is tipped with a ruby. It can just be plain gold. There's also the possibility of putting Lakshmi on a tali. And there's all kinds of things. On the right-hand side, you see talis from Tamil Nadu. So you have goddess Meenakshi and Sundareshwara. So here immediately showing a certain affiliation to Madurai. A Tulasi Sananamun tali, probably a Vaishnavite tali. Pengalai Namam symbol, which is, of course, a Sri Vaishnava tali, and Vadagalai, another Sri Vaishnava tali. A plain Bottu tali. This is most often, I think, associated where somebody is either a smarta or not choosing to articulate sectarian identity through overtly through the tali itself. A Shivaling tali. A God Annalakshmi with 2 mudras tali. These are new ones. Some of these are new. The tali used by Chettiars, many of versions of this are in museum collections, and a plain tali. So this gives you a sense through this one jewelry item about how communities articulate in a very personal way, in a very gendered way, on the body of the woman, the union of 2 families in a kinship network. The way that the 2 families are joined. So in the marriage ceremony, the groom ties 1 tali, if it's 2, and sometimes the tali, 1 tali is given by the mother, the bride side, and 1 tali is given by the groom side. So it's and placed on 1 necklace. So it's the joining of 2 families. Sometimes the mother-in-law ties 1 tali around the neck of the bride, which constructs a wholly new relationship between the bride taking family and the bride and her family. So there is a lot of variations, but it's a deeply nuanced way of considering how to view the kinship network, how to value it, what it's supposed to do. Because the bride, for example, in many South Indian families, till recently, a woman would wake up and she would lift up the 2 talis, and from her necklace, which is always worn, not shown, it is inside her sari pallu, it is at her breast level, she would lift it up and touch it to her eyes in the morning, asking for her long life as a sumangali, as a woman who is not a widow, but somebody who's auspicious and has her husband alive with her. Now, I want to just go to another kind of way of thinking about kinship. So here are marriage talis, one way of thinking about it, from modern ones, but useful for talking about the issues I want to talk about, because the issues were there even then. So this is a place that is on the way from in Shimoga district, and this is a roadside shrine. And it's a group of steles, and it has been figured into a group of symbols that come together to constitute a kind of sacred space in this area. So it's on the roadside from Kubuttu to Bandalike in Shimoga district. So here are some of the stele. So these are all sati stones. You know these are sati stones because there is a pillar, and I hope you can all see my pointer in the center one. There's a pillar. There's a pillar here on the left side one, and there's a pillar here. But each of these sati stones has a different way of representing. This one is buried, so I can't really say what's down here, but it has a different story to tell. So in this one, the couple is sitting above the folded arm. And we know that a sati stone, a sati pillar, is a pillar that talks about, it memorializes and commemorates a woman who committed sati. So in this case, it's a single woman. In this case, there are 2 women. who are represented here. And here is a single woman. And what constitutes a sati is, she is a sumangali. She died while her husband was alive or with her husband. Satis, not all satis are dead women. Many inscriptions tell us that a good wife is herself a sati. She doesn't have to die on her husband's funeral pyre to be a sati. But I think that many of these memorial pillars are for women who either died with their husbands or died before them, or perhaps even died in such a way that they might have died with a sword or some kind of representation of their husband. So whatever happened when these women died, the stones tell us that these women were sumangalis, and not only sumangalis, but they were satis. And in this case, what you have is a sun and a moon, so that their fame will last as long as the sun and the moon. And when you come down below, you have the husband here sitting in a Padmasana praying, and you have in an Anjali Mudra, and you have two women, his two wives. And we don't know, there are no inscriptions here, but we can, the stone, the way that it's designed, asks us to, well, one can assume, and it's an assumption, that both these women are associated with these two pillars. So these are the two women. Down below is a kind of peti, a box. It's hard to tell what this is. It could be something like a pindika. A pindika could be sort of a asana or a pita on which you put pind, and there are three balls on it. So perhaps it's something like that. And pind has many meanings besides being the rice ball. It also has the meaning of a kind of scaffolding for form. So there's lots of complex things here, which I have not figured that out yet because I'm just starting. This is new research. This is from a research trip I took about a month ago. And on the right-hand side, you have another sati pillar, and you have, if you observe the women's hair on the middle one, you see that it's quite smooth, their hair. But when you come here, you see that the couple here is, first of all, it's a couple. There's, of course, the sun and the moon. Her hand has a lemon. So this lemon is to ward off the evil eye, but it's used in worships of goddesses. So it's an important symbol of auspiciousness. And the woman here has a headdress where you see lots of very detailed hair ornament, which has a lot of flowers in it. And down when you look below, you have two hunters in some kind of battle. So if you move up from the bottom to the top, what you have is a situation where the husband died in some kind of battle. And who would be, we know that many people who fought battles with bows and arrows came from communities which had expertise in working with bows and arrows. And they might be from hilly regions, as this region is hilly. This is Are Malanadu, and which means semi-Malnad, the land of rain or mountainous land. You can think of it in a couple of different ways. Samna Guru Raja has done interesting work telling us when this word starts appearing in inscriptions. And you have the wife showing a headdress, which is not a widely visible headdress, and suggests that the wife would wear flora of a certain kind to ornament herself as a beautiful, auspicious woman. When you go to other memorial stones, these are all memorial stones. They're called Viragals, Satigals, of different kinds. And these are from Balligave, an Amruteshwara temple in Amrutapura. You will see that if the previous ones look very graphic and very simple, this set of memorial stones or things which have to do with inscription stelae, foundation stones. The bottom one is a foundation stele. It has a large inscription. So this is at the top half. It's a crowning carving, crowning of this. At the bottom, which I don't have the picture here, is the very long inscription. So what you have here is a way of thinking about space and storytelling about the heroism of this warrior and the amount of investment in carving radically different from this kind of memorial stone. So you have 3 registers, 1, 2, 3. So here is a battle, probably to protect some cows. And he has fought and he has died. And he is taken up in a beautifully carved Pushpaka Vahana, which is designed, the sculptor has designed it to look like a mandapa. And 2 apsaras, beautifully carved apsaras, very lovely, lifting him up to Shivaloka. And here he is in Shivaloka. And there he is aligned with Nandi. So he's as devout and happy as Nandi. Nandi means happy, bliss. Coming, we know the word Ananda, that comes from the same root. And you have a ascetic whose jata juta are piled on his head and nodded as he worships with a lamp with 3 or 4 cups in which flames are there. And there is a beautiful floral ornament or mukuta on top of the crown, kirita or mukuta. It's hard to tell what it is on top of the linga. And there is probably a disciple here who aligns himself with the ascetic. So this is a very interesting way to think about kinship. He is dead. He has been memorialized. He has aligned himself with this particular guru. And we must always ask, who's to benefit from this memorial pillar? And there is an inscription on this memorial pillar. It's too new. I've not yet gone to the inscription text to understand what is said on this. But clearly, this memorialized the dead. But the memorialization of the dead is for the living. And who are the living that would benefit from this kind of memorialization? I'd like to talk about that as we go through this. Lecture. That's his kin. In this picture, again, you have a brave warrior fighting a tiger or a lion. Hard to tell. It looks like it could be a tiger, but it could also be a lion. And he dies. And then he goes up again in this beautiful mandapa, Pushpaka Vahana, and he goes to Shivaloka. In the top memorial stone, in the bottom stele top thing, you have 3 mandapa shapes, which are imagined with shikaras of 3 different kinds. And this one is double-storied, and there are 2 gods in either of the 2 side pavilions, but the main god is Shiva in his aniconic form, because he is amurta. He doesn't have any form beside, and the aniconic form represents the fullness of him. So we have the ascetic who is worshiping him here, and this connects the entire inscription down below, which usually connects a family to a guru, to a king, to the construction of a temple, and that whole set of circumstances is delineated, the granting of land, water, all these kinds of things. Another set of memorial stones are like this. These are nishiddhis, when Jains voluntarily commit salekhana, which is a kind of voluntary death. So here you have the person who is doing that kind of voluntary death, and Jina, and this beautiful image of a calf feeding on its mother. And of course, here too, the sun and the moon. And this is a teacher. And here you have a woman who does the same thing here. And when you go to memorial stones such as this, they are much more complex. I'm not going to go into great detail. I think I've shown enough complexity here, but you can understand how the memorial stone is designed then to imagine a certain kind of temple tower at the top of this. And this type of temple tower in this region is called Famsana, which is, I think, is largely associated with memorial temples. We know examples of this. This is on the notification of the invitation for this talk, the Famsana temples on Himakuta Hill. And of course, great care is given to show ascetics as ascetics. Here's a close-up with his hair tied up in this beautiful way. It's extraordinary. All over India, you find images like this, in Gwalior, everywhere. Now I'm going to the second part of what Natalie Kempen said, that families are historically contingent social constructions, modes of production, and ranking systems. So I go back, I use the memorial stones because I think they're a nice, simple way to begin. So here, they're historically contingent. If you see, for example, a sati pillar, sati stone, sati kallu, which is shaped with a simple bent hand, and then you have a husband and a wife and the sun and the moon, you know that it's imagining eternity. This woman's goodness, sati-ness, is for eternity. This image of a woman from Bandalike doesn't have a sun or a moon on it. And one wonders what this is all about. It's not entirely clear. So they're images of women as women, but not entirely clear what they represent. So it wasn't important enough to necessarily articulate her as a sati. Here is a pillar that's buried at a place called Talagunda. And if you look at it very closely, it's a Shivalinga. So it's a Shivalinga. And this Shivalinga has another linga on it. And it has the glands clearly delineated. And it almost seems to suggest that a linga that's worshiping comes out of a real linga. So it's very complicated. I don't have a full understanding of what it means to double up a lingam this way. And of course, the pitha, which is its bindu, this is often called nada, and this is called bindu. This is called, the pitha is also called yoni, and this is called linga. There are different ways to conceptualize it in this system where most of these sculptures were come out of from the Kala Mukha and the Pashupata system of thinking about worshiping Shiva. And here is another memorial stone. Here it does have a sun and the moon. And here is a type of woman who has that very, very floral, large floral ornament in her hair. Clearly an important thing to show because it shows what her rank and what her station in society might be, along with her husband. Now, when you look at such things, as I've already described, you can see that there's a difference between the artistic investment in this kind of a memorial stone and the artistic investment in this kind of a memorial stones. They're the same class of men, we don't know, hard to tell, there's nothing immediately, but we know that the class of memorial stone is different. So the memorial stone on the left is very expensive to carve. It would be immediately more expensive to carve. They're the same stones. It's much more narratively complex and structured. The carving is much finer. The detailing is much finer. And on the right side, what you have is a very, very bold and very graphic kind of carving, and perhaps suggesting that the same amount of artistic investment wasn't expended on this person. Now, whether it was the people who commissioned this particular memorial stone or the people that the kind of skill of artists that was available to them, the type of memorial stones that were carved and made in that area, that is hard to tell. But all of this is telling you that there is a kind of difference that's being articulated even within the relatively same region. Now, when you go to a place like Gerusopa, which is farther from Shimoga district, some in the Ghats in Uttar Kannada district, you see heaps of unexcavated material. So you see pithas lying around. This is a very important Jain mata and temples that are here. You see much of which is unexcavated. You see two pithas with the pranalas, the spouts from which the Abhisheka would pour out. And what you see is a small memorial stone here. So there's a range of material debris here that tells you that different kinds of objects could be sitting in one place, suggesting that different attitudes could come together. Maybe because they were all the same community of people, or those activities were all equally valuable. And lest you think that Jains were not warriors, Jains were very much warriors. So if you go to places like Bhatkal and other places along the coast of Karnataka, you find large memorial stones to Jain warriors that are dedicated there. It was not the best way to live a good life, but it was one way to live a good life. Now, in Gerisokpa, there's also these kinds of sculptures that come together. And what's really fascinating about such things, when you think about the large Jain temple that's still in worship there, I haven't put in all those pictures because I wanted to give us plenty of time, is that when you see piles of broken down things, what often ends up continuing to be worshipped are these images of women. And these are worshipped as goddesses. And they're worshipped with materials that are available to them. So what you see there are, of course, the green bangles, auspicious things, but also areca palm fronds and flowers, right? So these flowers are really interesting because they suggest that connect back in some way to an image such as this, where this kind of very florid floral formation is available in this area. It could be many other flowers. I'm not saying that on that memorial stones, it was an areca palm headdress that she was wearing, but that this idea of using local flora and fauna, it ties to this idea about geography. So it's very important to acknowledge that rank changes. So sometimes things which are founded at one moment with great pomp collapse, and then people come along later and decide what's important to them to worship. Now, I'm going to speak for another 10, 15 minutes, and then I'm going to end the lecture, and then we can have a conversation. So the lecture started I started speaking at 5:40, so I would like to speak for another 10, 15 minutes and wrap it up. So this is moving towards the last two sections of the lecture. Architecture is a form of discourse that brings social constructions into material form. So one of the earliest temples that I started thinking about when I was doing my research for my dissertation, and it continues to be deeply generative for me, is this very early temple it has multiple Shivalingas, and it was built from the 9th through the 11th centuries, and it's from Kukanur in Raichur district in Karnataka, very close to the Telangana border. And what's really fascinating about this is that it was built between the 9th through the mid 11th centuries, and what you see is a very haphazard placement of shrines and new Shivalinga shrines that were built over 2 centuries, attachable to the central pavilions. And the central pavilion's purpose is altered when these new Shivalinga Garbhagrahas are attached to it. So what you have is this mandapa at the center, sometimes serving to hold a Nandi, but also serving as an opening to attach new donations of Shivalingas. So here is literally a family tree of Shivalingas materialized over 2 centuries. And if we probe into the inscriptions of many temples like this is not the only example, you will find that these are generations of people who have many people who find that the first donation is an important one, the guru that's associated with it, and then his disciples, and they encourage other people to follow through with new donations that attach itself to. And this is a quite common temple form. Now, when you look at a temple like this one, this is the Kaleshwara temple, and it was donated by, it was consecrated by Duggimaya during the reign of the Chalukyan king Ahamalla in 1985 and 985, sorry, Common Era. And here's a temple that takes this idea that is looking like it's just sort of developing and completely formalizes it in some sense by creating a set of shrines around the main mandapa, which is this one right here. So if you look at this is Kaleshwara, it's dedicated to Kaleshwara, the Shiva form, as you see here. B is donated to Narasimha, B is this one. And C is, the letter is missing here, was dedicated to Surya. So 3 different gods are made into an association with each other through the construction of, over 2 centuries, through the construction of multiple garbhagrahas centered around a single mandapa. And that's really important because the mandapa shape, the squareness of it, allows each of these donations to, this is the main axis. But it allows the difference between this and this. So this is the main shrine of Shiva. It allows this and this to be in relationship to each other, but not at a deeply lower rank. So B is not at a deeply lower rank than A. Both the donation, architecture, and the god. They're all, in a sense, related to each other. Now, this continues, this experimental type of temple continues at Itige. This was also founded by a merchant in honor of Chalukya king. I'm showing you some images just so that you see the common prevalence of this. Another one at the Dodda Basappa temple in Dambal. This is all in central Karnataka, donated around 1100 to 1125 CE. And it has an inscription, which is very interesting. The inscription refers to the reign of the Western Chalukya king Someshwara IV and records the gift of income derived from the Panaya tax on all the gardens except those endowed as Sarvamanya to the deity Maila Bechwara, made in the presence of the god Swayambhu at Dharmapura by Mahapradhana Senadipati Dandanayaka Tejimaya and his subordinates Akkana Dandanayaka and Revarasa for dredging and repairs in stone and wood to the sluice of the local tank called Gona Samudra. The gift was entrusted to the 16 setis, merchants of the village, who also made gifts of land to the same tank in conjunction with the Nakaras, another merchant group. Dharmapura, also mentioned as Dharmabolal, was situated in Masavadi division. The record was this record contains a few Sanskrit verses also, and it was composed by the poet Nagadeva Bhatta, son of Bammarasa. So you can see in this kind of inscription the range of things. Not all these places are about not all these things are about the Dodda Basappa temple, but that temple gives the space and the occasion to mark this massive set of transactions that happen between a gods, between donors, between merchants, between people who repair tanks, between gardeners, between 2 different kinds of merchants, between different places, and between poets and between a poet and, of course, his ancestor, Bammarasa. So this is the kind of thing when I was talking about that overlapping kinship systems. Now, when we think about a very well-known temple like the Chennakeshava, you know that this particular temple is founded by King Vishnuvardhana, the very important Hoysala king, and his wife Shantala Devi also commissioned a temple nearby. And over time, all the way up to 1343, Narasimha, the Hoysala king Narasimha I and the Hoysala king Balala II, and Somaya Dandanayaka who built the boundary wall, which was much, much later addition, perhaps after it was attacked by the Sultanate of Delhi, this temple, this temple became a way to mark a lineage of associations from the Hoysala family and their officers, and also the various incidents in their family and in their kingdom through the construction of this temple and the maintenance of a certain idea of a temple, which I will speak about, a temple design. It is the stellate form, which is basically you take a square and then you keep rotating it and you create star points of a star. So that's why it's called a stellate temple. And this becomes very important. It's there at the Dodabasappa temple, it's there at the Itigi temple, and it is not there at the Kaleshwara temple. At some point, this becomes a very important model for a temple in this community, in this region. Now, when you go to the Hoysaleshwara temple, here again, the two lingas are associated with, built over quite a few years, associated with, commissioned by a merchant named Ketamala in the reign of, sorry for the misspelling, Vishnuvardhana, and dedicated to both Hoysaleshwara and to Shantaleshwara, Shantala being the queen, the Hoysala queen. And here we have the Lakshmi temple at it's called the Lakshmi temple, but it has many gods in it at Doddagaddavalli, and it was commissioned by a merchant in 1113 by the merchant Kullahanna Rahuta and his wife Sahaja Devi, again during the reign of Vishnuvardhana. And it has different kinds of temple towers, marking differentiations between the various gods. And this is very, very interesting because it has different, we don't know whether this was Vishnu, dedicated to Vishnu, that's why I put a question mark, but it has some sort of association between gods which are associated, Kali and Durga being associated with Shiva, and Lakshmi and Vishnu being associated with each other, but Bhairava is also there. In a temple at the Somnatha temple at Haralahalli on the banks of the Tungabhadra, the inscription associated with this temple, it was originally an undated shrine. We don't know when it was built, but probably it was expanded greatly between 1181 and 88. And Vasundhara Filiosa and Jean Filiosa have done research on this. And it was expanded by King Joma into a Trikuta temple. Now, this Trikuta temple form, the Kalamukha texts tell us, whether they're the inscription texts, mostly in the inscriptions that accompany their temples associated with Kalamukhas, is the privileged form of architecture, privileged form of temple style, that you have 3 towers and a temple and attached to a single mandapa. And they also tell us that the Kalamukha texts also tell us that Jeernodhara is better. Jeernodhara, that is sacralized renovation, is better than building a new temple. The idea of maintenance of an existing grant is better than founding a new structure. This temple is associated with the Kalamukha preceptor. It's associated with a king named, with a god named Vikrameshwara, Vishnu, along with, of course, Somanatha, who's Shiva. There's also another temple founded in the vicinity to Dasaveshwara, Shiva. There's another Shiva temple founded in 1214 to Tuluveshwara, named after Tuluvai, a woman, a wife of Vikramaditya. You notice that local kings identify themselves with their overlords by naming themselves after their overlords. That's also something that's really interesting. So it gets very confusing when you read these inscription times. And I think that's the idea, to kind of conflate the identities of various people to show association in some sense. Jikeshwara, another Shaiva temple that was built in 1259. So this one original foundation became the context for creating a large set of associations that functioned as a kinship system among various kinds of people. And of course, they all married into each other. If you read in these inscriptions and the way that Samna Guru Raja has written, you will see that their marriage alliances penetrate into each of these families, and overlords marry into smaller families marry into other smaller families. Those smaller families marry into maybe the people of another region, hoping because they've fallen out, or different circumstances. So the temple and the inscription become a point of noting all these complex kinship relationships. Now, when we look at the Keshava temple at Somnathpura, I'm using well-known examples, hoping that many of you have gone there. Here is a Trikuta temple, not a Kalamukha temple, founded by Somnatha Dandanayaka, general of the Hoysala King Narasimha. Here it's three forms of Vishnu, Venugopala, Keshava, and Janardhana. And they're all three different aspects, three different moods. Janardhana is quite warrior-like. And of course, this fabulous boundary wall with all these shrines in it would have probably been designed for more images to be placed inside of it. And I come to Hampi, and here is a very small Shivalinga temple. And here I'd like to just mention it, that it dates from 1199. And it's a Famsana temple, and it's located, the inscription is located near this temple, which is the Immadi Rachamalleshwara, named so after the person in whose memory the temple was to perpetuate. The inscription states that the donor Chaudaya, in honor of Rachamalla, this is my own writing, in case you're wondering why I didn't cite somebody, I'm citing myself. The inscription states that the donor Chaudaya, in honor of Rachamalla, had the important shrines of Virupaksha, that is the main Virupaksha temple, Hampa Devi, to the goddess Pampa, Bhairava, Hampi's special god of death, whitewashed and renovated. He also gifted these gods land. To these gods, provided them with expensive ritual implements, and covered the costs of boarding cost Brahmin staying in the local rest house, Satra. The god Immadi Rachamalleshwara, that is in this temple, too received a portion of the offerings funded by the land grant. Another temple at Hampi is a Trikuta again, and the inscription says, and it's called Kampiraraya's temple, and it dates from the early 14th century. The great worshipper of the lotus feet of Sangameshwara Deva, Veera Kampila Deva, son of Mummadi Singanayaka, installed 3 lingas in a Shivalaya for his father, mother, Marnakitti and Singanayaka, and Perudiya Nayaka. Not entirely clear who that Perudiya Nayaka is. So not his parents, but somebody else, maybe a grandfather, maybe an office, maybe another general that he was closely associated with. But it brings them all together into a relationship at which he is the center as the donor. So when these kind of Trikuta temples and memorial temples are built on the Himakuta hill, they all seem to cascade down, paying attention to this landscape, to the river, which was called Dakshina Ganga. Tungabhadra River here is called Dakshina Ganga. The Virupaksha temple is there. So it's a landscape that's designed both for memorialization and paying attention to what was soon becoming, at this time, the important god of Hampi. Virupaksha was becoming one of the most important gods in this region. There are so many temples dedicated to him, that form of Shiva. Now, a temple itself is a social construct, which in turn shapes other social constructs. So I was showing you talis, and I want to show you this last tali. This is a tali from Hassan district, probably from the 19th century. I have made it into a pair of earrings, but this is, if you look at it from the side and the right image, you see that it's a gopura, Trikuta temple gopura on top. And then the very top, the kalasha is shaped like a nipple, and the top of it is shaped like a breast. And in between these two was a namam, a Vaishnava namam, probably from the Hassan Iyengars. So this was the joining of two families who are both Hassan Iyengars probably, and it was placed on the breast of the woman who's at the time of marriage. Now, I want to end this lecture by taking the idea of kinship and just suggesting a few things. These are from the Khazana Museum at Golconda and the Kamlapur Museum at Hampi. The extreme left image has a man beheading himself. The middle memorial stone, these are all memorial stones, where he has cut off his head and is holding it in his hand. And the extreme right image has a man who has cut himself into two. And you can see that the artist has shown that. Now, how do we understand this? If the memorial stone is generally about some notion of memorializing kinship, how might we understand these images? One is to say that these images suggest that kinship comes to an end when you say that nothing else matters but my devotion to God. So these are self-sacrifice, images of self-sacrifice, usually associated with very warrior heroic Shaivas. There was a mandapa at Sri Salem called Siro Mandapa, where the heads of warriors who had decapitated themselves were hung in display. So that could be one way of saying that kinship doesn't matter. But somebody made these things and installed them and benefited from that. So perhaps kinship did matter, but in a different way. And then finally, I'd like to end this talk with the poem by Basava. And it is here on the left-hand side, the translation by the version that A.K. Ramanujan wrote, which is, "The rich will make temples for Shiva. What shall I, a poor man, do? My legs are pillars, the body the shrine, the head a cupola of gold. Listen, O Lord of the meeting rivers. Things standing shall fall, but the moving ever shall stay." Basava was a minister, it is thought, in the Kalachuri king Bijala's court. So that's interesting. You understand what he's saying. These are not the only things he said, but he was saying that the rich make temples for Shiva. And it's so beautiful in Kannada. I don't know if I should read it. I think I should read it because you should hear how it sounds in Kannada. Ullavaru Shivalaya Maduvaraya, Nanena Madali Badavanaya. So it's exactly that. The rich make Shiva temples. What can I make, a poor man? Enna kale kambau Dehave Degula, Shirave Honna Kalasavaya. So my legs are pillars, Kambhai, many of you will understand that, and my body is a temple. And my head is the Kalasha, the golden Kalasha. Stavakali untu, Jangamake Alivilla, Aya. Kelaya Kudala Sangama Deva. So I'm not a native Kannada speaker. So whoever's a native Kannada speaker, please forgive me. But I love Kannada. And so this is a beautiful ending. So he says, listen, Kelaya, O Lord of the meeting rivers, things standing shall fall, but the moving ever shall stay. Jangama, those which are moving. So here I have spoken to you for 40 minutes about temples and kinship systems. And at the same time, Basava was writing at the same time that these Kalamukha temples were built. He's saying that the rich will make temples. So when I want to end this lecture by saying that whatever I have said is just a small portion of what was going on, and that people had really complex and beautiful thoughts about temples and worshiping and family. The rich make temples to Shiva in order to make more riches, to make more riches for their children, to construct stability. But the moving, and they fall down, as I've shown you many examples of such fallen down things. But the things which are moving shall ever stay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Garimella, for sharing such an interesting research. And I think I speak for everyone that we all are awaiting more from you as your research continues. as you said, we'll be having a conversation now. We have a few questions here. The first one asks, what does the Stela temple plan say about the Hoysalas, if it does say something peculiar, and how does it model their kinship?
Well, I think I was trying to say that when a community of temple builders follows a particular temple design and a plan so ubiquitously and so tightly in a region, they're visually constructing a cohesive community. The temples, the lingas are associated with family members or with people that they are their overlords or people they want to be associated with. The king is benefiting when a merchant builds a temple in his honor. The merchant is benefiting when the king accepts his donation. And there is a kind of kinship of mutual acceptance that is made. And of course, the architectural design allows for the worshiper to move from shrine to shrine while staying in the same shrine. From Garbhagriha to Garbhagriha, to the body of the worshiper itself, that connection is made. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Another attendee asks, are there any mason marks on the Sati stones?
Not that I know of. Some have artist names. There's a volume that Chettar and Gunter Sondheimer edited, and in that there is an essay that talks about artist names. But in general, artists being the people who carve them, but in general, they tend to be not identified. And in general, the memorial stones predominantly are uninscribed rather than inscribed in this region.
Continuing on Sati stones, another question is, you mentioned that the Sati stones are sometimes commemorative of the wife's dedication to her husband and not necessarily symbolic of a woman's Sati through death. Are there any other instances of this in pieces outside of Deccan? Anything we can look for?
No. What I said is that a Sati doesn't necessarily have to be a woman who died for her husband. The inscriptions tell us that a Sati is a good wife. That's all she is. But when she decides to commit sahagamana, that is to go with the husband, then she becomes, and that's noted, then she becomes a Sati of a different order. And sahagamana doesn't always happen with the husband's body. As I mentioned, it can happen with not exactly at the time of his death. He might die in battle, and she might die with a sword or something associated with him, and that could be it. Satis are also celebrated for sacrificing for the larger family, and they become worshipped in the family. For example, there's a Kannada folk tale called Keregahara, very deeply studied, where the youngest daughter-in-law in a Gauda family is sacrificed to hold up the wall of a tank bund that keeps bursting. And they decide that this the third daughter-in-law is expendable in a sense, sacrificable. And then, of course, she's memorialized in this. No one knows the older daughter-in-laws as anything but the women who didn't die. The youngest daughter-in-law is remembered as the woman who died and she also became Mahasati, right? She's understood as a Sati.
Okay. Okay, we have one last question. Is there a transition in the purpose of the inscriptions seen with the increasing use of paper or even elimination of inscriptions?
Oh, are you saying inscriptions on temples with are there fewer inscriptions on temples with the coming of paper? Is that what you're saying?
I think that's what this question regards.
No. You know that people still put inscriptions in marble and granite with temples even now. So there's a function for an inscription, which is beyond just noting who did the donation, but it also actually looks good on a temple to say somebody, it tells everybody that somebody paid the money for this temple and this person made it. So it has a certain kind of association between the donation, the idea that the temple itself is worthy of donations. So that sort of thing requires a stone inscription. Temples don't carry paper doesn't carry inscriptions, they carry stories about temples. And there's another kind of document, copper plates, and they also carry lots of narratives about temple foundation. But the stone inscription has a very particular power and presence that smaller media don't have, or less permanent media don't have.
Okay, we have more questions coming in. This one says by Avni R that you mentioned a word nakaras while presenting the Chalukya inscription. Can you explain it a bit? Is it just another word for Shreni we find in Vedas?
Look, the Shreni of the Vedas are Shreni is the Shreni of the Vedas are not the nakaras of medieval Deccan. The nakaras are a very particular mercantile community, and they're quite famous. They're all over South India. But whether they sometimes like to invoke the idea that they were Shrenis of the Vedas, that's something worth investigating. So if that's the kind of question you're asking, go for it. Look at the word Shreni and see if that is meaningful to the nakaras. Let me just look at the slide that you're talking about. The second slide you presented with the Brahma, the Linga, and the Vishnu, probably. Which century did it belong to? Let me just go to the second slide. Which one are you talking about? I showed you many slides. You'll type it in and then I'll understand. Okay.
I think she's talking about slide 8 or 9, I think.
Okay. Let me see, slide 8 or 9. Okay, so I don't see, where do you see the Vishnu, darling? I don't see the Vishnu, it's a Jina. These are Jinas on slide 9. And on slide 8, they're all Shivalingas. And they all belong, you asked which century, these all belong to the 11th and the 12th century.
Okay, I think that answered Avni's question. We have one more question. Are the devotion pieces that show self-sacrifice unique to Deccan temple pieces?
Okay. Can you repeat that question again, please?
Are the devotion pieces that show self-sacrifice unique to Deccan temple pieces?
So I don't know if they're temple pieces. That's one thing I want to make that very clear. They're in a museum now. They were excavated largely in Lingasagar, near Lingasagar, which is in Raichur district, and brought during the colonial era archaeology to Hyderabad and housed at the Golconda Museum. I'm not sure whether they're associated with temples. What they are is deeply associated with Shiva, for sure. They had machines to help them do these kinds of self-sacrifice. A large pillar with a blade attached to it that would be lowered by when the weight was kicked away, and then it would snap the head of somebody, cut the head off of somebody. It's very, very complex things. Not everybody did those kinds of things. Sometimes I get scared when I look at those images.
Are they still found?
Yes. What do you mean, those?
Those machines that you just talked about?
No, they are not. We don't have any examples. We have images of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the last of the questions. Thank you, Dr. Garimella, for such an interesting lecture. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the KJK Memorial Lecture. The museum is open to visitors from 10:15 to 5. We hope to see you at the grounds here. And for further lectures and other program information, please keep checking your email from us or follow us on our social media platforms. Thank you so much and good evening to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.